students, this is the second chapter of your book, Mrs. Packletide's Tiger by Saki. It is an amusing story where the author uses humor and satire. In this story, the author highlights the weaknesses and childish behavior of women. Let us go ahead. I'll tell you about the author, Hector Hugh Munro. He wrote under the pen name Saki. He was a British writer whose witty stories satirized the society and culture of his day. He was considered a master of the short story. He wrote a full-length play, 2 one-act plays, a historical study, a short novel, and a fantasy about future German invasion and occupation of Britain. Let us start with the chapter. I'll read it out to you and explain along with it. It was Mrs. Packletide's pleasure and intention that she should shoot a tiger. Not that the lust to kill had suddenly descended on her, or that she felt that she would leave India safer and more wholesome than she had found it, with 1 fraction less of wild beast per million of inhabitants. So here the author is telling us that Mrs. Packletide wanted to shoot a tiger for pleasure, and it was her intention, means she wanted to go for hunting. The author is trying to tell us what was her motive to go for hunting a tiger. The narrator says that it was neither her hobby nor did she bother about making India safer. Here this sentence, more wholesome than she had found it, with 1 fraction less of wild beast per million of inhabitants. Per million of inhabitants refers to the population of India, and 1 fraction less of wild beast means that the tiger which she will shoot. So the author is saying that by shooting 1 tiger, it will not make the population of India safer. Neither was it her hobby to go for hunting. So let us go ahead and find out what was her motive to shoot a tiger. The compelling motive for her sudden deviation towards the footsteps of Nimrod was the fact that Luna Bimberton had recently been carried 11 miles in an aeroplane by an Algerian aviator and talked of nothing else, only a personally procured tiger skin and a heavy harvest of press photographs could successfully counter that sort of thing. So in these lines, the author is conveying the motive behind Mrs. Packletide going for hunting a tiger. Now here the author is talking about the compelling motive, that is the reason why she was going for hunting. He says for her sudden deviation. Sudden deviation was there because otherwise she had never hunted before in her life. So it was all of a sudden that she wanted to hunt a tiger. Then he says towards the footsteps of Nimrod. It means she was walking in the footsteps of a person by the name of Nimrod. Nimrod is a character taken from the Bible. He was the great grandson of Noah and he was a mighty hunter. So the author is creating humor by saying that Mrs. Packletide was also becoming a hunter just like Nimrod. Then he tells us the fact it was that a lady by the name of Luna Bimberton. So Mrs. Packletide wanted to go hunting because of her rivalry and jealousy towards a lady by the name of Luna Bimberton. Now what Luna Bimberton had done? she had recently been carried 11 miles in an aeroplane by an Algerian aviator. So Algerian aviator means a pilot from Algeria. Luna Bimbleton had travelled 11 miles in an aeroplane. In these days in which this story has been written, travelling by aeroplane was a big deal. So that is why it is referred over here that this lady Luna Bimbleton had travelled all the way 11 miles in an aeroplane along with a pilot from Algeria to the desired hunting spot. And from there she had procured tiger skin. So Mrs. Packletide also wanted to get a similar tiger skin and lots of photographs to be published in the newspaper so that she could outshine the accomplishment done by Luna Bimbleton. So this was the compelling motive for Mrs. Packletide's sudden desire to go on hunting. Let us go ahead. Mrs. Packletide had already arranged in her mind the lunch she would give at her house in Curzon Street, ostensibly in Luna Bimbleton's honour, with a tiger skin rug occupying most of the foreground and all of the conversation. She had also already designed in her mind the tiger claw brooch that she was going to give Luna Bimbleton on her next birthday. In a world that is supposed to be chiefly swayed by hunger and by love, Mrs. Packletide was an exception. Her movements and motives were largely governed by dislike of Luna Bimbleton. So here the author is telling us that Mrs. Packletide had already planned in her mind. So she had already chalked out a plan to throw a lunch party at her house in Curzon Street. Ostensibly means supposedly. It was supposed to be in honor of Luna Bimbleton's accomplishment. Mrs. Packletide had thought of giving a party at her house in the honor of Luna Bimbleton, supposedly. But actually she wanted to show her down by procuring a tiger skin rug and putting it on display during the lunch party so that it will occupy all the conversation. She wanted to draw the attention of all the guests towards this tiger skin rug so that they would forget Luna Bimbleton and her accomplishment, and thus she would show her down. She had also planned a gift of a brooch in the shape of the claw of a tiger for Luna Bimbleton. This brooch was also in the shape of the claw of a tiger in order to make mockery of Luna Bimbleton's accomplishment. Further, the author says, in a world that is supposed to be chiefly swayed by hunger and by love, Mrs. Packletide was an exception. Her movements and motives were largely governed by dislike of Luna Bimbleton. So the author is trying to tell us that while most of the people's actions are governed by either hunger or by love, so it means that whatever acts people do are either to satisfy their hunger or in love. But Mrs. Packletide's acts were chiefly governed by her dislike, by her rivalry and jealousy for Luna Bimbleton. So all that Mrs. Packletide did was in her rivalry and jealousy for Luna Bimbleton. Circumstances proved propitious. Mrs. Packletide had offered 1,000 rupees for the opportunity of shooting a tiger without overmuch risk or exertion, and it so happened that a neighboring village could boast of being the favored rendezvous of an animal of respectable antecedents, which had been driven by the increasing infirmities of age to abandon game killing and confine its appetite to the smaller domestic animals. Now here the author is saying that the circumstances were favorable for Mrs. Packletide. She had offered 1,000 rupees. She had offered a reward of 1,000 rupees for arranging a tiger. And the neighboring village was the perfect destination where the villagers found a tiger of good lineage. So over here the narrator says a tiger of respectable antecedents was found. So this is also said by the author in order to create humor that Mrs. Packletide was shooting for the first time and she wanted a tiger of a good lineage so that she could boast of this also. Then he says that it was the favored rendezvous. Rendezvous means meeting. So the neighboring village was the perfect place where the perfect tiger, desired tiger for shooting was found. Then he is describing the tiger. He says, which had been driven by increasing infirmities of age. So the tiger was weak due to old age. It was infirm. Infirm means it was weak. And had given up hunting larger animals for food. It had abandoned game killing. It means it had given up hunting larger animals for food and confined its appetite to the smaller domestic animals. It means that now, in order to satisfy its hunger, the tiger used to kill smaller domestic animals only.